Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I want to return to the concept of portals, because when I was talking about portal fantasies, some people thought that it's trying to get the definition is the thing. But actually, one of the most important points about definitions would be definitions help shape the way that we think about things. And there are lots of different ways to approach it. It's not that this is the definition, this is how it's applied, end of story. Definitions are always the starting point for the discussion and for the analysis. So I'm going to return to this, but instead of looking at it strictly as portal fantasy, I want to talk about the actual portal element, because I think that's where some of the confusion arises. And I'm going to look at this from basically three different perspectives. One from the narrative perspective, the diegetic perspective, what the portal looks like in the world. Then look at it in terms of the narrative function that the portal is performing, because that gives us a different way to approach it. And then I want to look at it from the position of the reader, how we approach it, how we think about it, the conversation that the author is having with us about it, and how that shapes our expectations. So I'm going to try to use technology here. Like I said, we're going to start with the narrative appearance, or the diegetic elements of a portal. And this is typically how we initially sort of start with any approach to anything. We think about what it is that's in the text. And I've a couple of questions here, like what does the portal look like? How does it fit in the world? How is it described? How do the characters within the world interact with it? How do the characters perceive it? All of these things are diegetic elements. They're thinking about it as it is presented in the story world. So let's have a look at one of the portals. And of course, most of you will recognize this. This is the wardrobe from the adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Interesting side note, Queen's University Belfast, in one of their libraries, has the C.S. Lewis reading room, the door to which is a facsimile of this wardrobe. So you go through the wardrobe into the reading room. It's quite a cool little thing. But when we think about this as a portal, there is a wardrobe, a mundane object. If we forget about the carving on it initially, but it's a mundane object, and the children discover it. They go into the wardrobe and they walk through the wardrobe. There is no back to it the way that we would expect, and it leads to a new realm. It's changing the mundane into the fantastic, and they transition from the primary world, or the real world, into Narnia, into a fantasy realm. And we think of that very much as a portal, but in a sense, it is kind of like a tunnel between two different things. There's a demarcation between the real and the fantastic, and they transition across this using the wardrobe to cross the threshold. It's basically just a wardrobe, but it has that element of thinking about the mundane and how any mundane object can lead us into the fantastic, can bring us to an adventure. But we can contrast that somewhat with this kind of portal, which we see in some of the Avengers movies, and obviously in the Doctor Strange movies, that using the ring, they can, Doctor Strange and some of the sorcerers can create these portals. Now, unlike the portal of the wardrobe, the portal that Doctor Strange uses doesn't move from the mundane to the fantastic. There's this movement of it just conflates time and space. So you transition from one place to another place very, very quickly using the portal. The portal is a tool to jump from one place to another. But in terms of how it looks, in terms of how it appears, so much of the world of the superhero stories, the MCU, is very much science fictional. But what we have with the sling ring portals is this fraying at the edges. They are not the clear-cut scientific, rational, here's the limit, here's one edge, here's another edge. There's lots of fraying to it. It is slightly more organic. And because of its golden color, this yellows and oranges, it's a much warmer color than a cold, scientific, rational color. So it is, in a lot of ways, very, very different to the wardrobe. The wardrobe is fixed in place, whereas the sling ring portals, they can make lots of them, they can have them in different places, and they go from one place in the world to another place in the world. They're not going to a different realm. But what's interesting about this is these are temporary. They are created, they disappear. The wardrobe has all of the appearance of being solid, something that doesn't move, doesn't change, whereas the sling ring portals are always very, very temporary. But then if we think about the Stargate Sg-1 portal, this is a wormhole going from one planet to another planet. That in this, we can see, again, it is a kind of portal. It's fixed in place. Yes, I know there are exceptions about it not being fixed in place, but it's fixed in place. It has that circular element that we associate, you know, with portals of a kind. We seem to think of them always being circular rather than rectangular, which we think of as doorways, even though a doorway is essentially a portal. But in Stargate Sg-1, this is clearly a portal. It leads from Earth to these strange alien worlds. And what's the big distinction between an alien world and a fantasy realm? Basically just the genre. But when we think about it, this is much more scientific. It's much more rational. This is the event horizon of a wormhole that joins two places in space-time. It sounds very, very scientific-y. But ultimately, it's just a magic portal. It's just a way to get the characters from one end to the other end of the galaxy in a short space of time. But unlike Doctor Strange's portal, which is you step in and you are immediately there and you can put your hand in and your hand is on the other side, this is much more like the wardrobe in that there is a transition time. Now, admittedly, the transition time in comparison to the distance that they're traveling is very, very small. But they go into the Stargate. There is a period of time where they are traveling and then they arrive at their destination. Much like with the wardrobe, they step in, they have to walk through the wardrobe as if it is a corridor, and then they arrive in Narnia. Whereas with the portal of Doctor Strange, you can put your hand in, grab something from the other side, and bring it back instantaneously. There is no travel time. And this brings me to an example that I'm fairly sure everyone's going to go, but this isn't a portal. This is different. And that is the Discovery from Stargate Discovery. Now, the reason I bring this up is this is a vehicle. And like the Stargate, the humans use it and they go from one place in the galaxy to another place in the galaxy almost instantaneously. So it's actually closer to how Doctor Strange's portals work, but this is something that you get in, like the wardrobe, and it transports you to another part of the galaxy. But the big difference between it and all of these others is obviously that it goes with you. You travel in it. It doesn't remain fixed in place, whereas the sling ring portal, the Stargate portal, the wardrobe, these are all fixed in a place while you transition. Although I suppose theoretically the sling ring portals could be made to move and move around while you are using them. There's no reason why they can't, because I'm sure that's something that they've thought of. But if we think of the Discovery as an object, the ship, you get on, you activate the portal like Doctor Strange activates his sling ring portal, or the Sg-1 team activates their wormhole, and then you use the object to get to another place. Just because it goes with you doesn't mean that it's not acting as a portal. And this brings me on to why the narrative appearance, because we here have something that's mundane, something in the wardrobe, something that looks fantastical, looks magic in Doctor Strange, something that looks very scientific and rational in SG-1, and then a science fictional vessel, again, looking very, very different. But it brings me on to thinking about things in terms of their narrative function. So we're going to use the same 4 examples and pose a couple of questions. What does it do? What narrative purpose does it serve? And do any of these share commonalities? So in each circumstance, each of these different objects and examples, characters use it to transition from one place to another place very quickly, or reach a place that would be otherwise unreachable. That's its narrative function. That's what it does. It moves characters from one location to another location very, very quickly. With the wardrobe, moving from the real world of England to Narnia. The sling ring, moving from, say, a place in New York to Siberia or Tibet, or even from one side of the room to the other side of the room. That it is the conflation of time and space. And that's exactly what the Stargate portal does. And it's exactly what Discovery does, that they can be in one part of the galaxy in one instant and another part of the galaxy in another instant. And so in terms of their function, these are all acting in very, very similar ways, even though we would immediately react against Discovery being defined as a portal because it's a vehicle, whereas the others are all static or relatively static. So we tend to almost think of them differently because they don't appear to be the same thing. And that's what the first section was about, its appearance. But when we think of the narrative purpose, when we think of how they are used within the narrative, what their function is, we suddenly realize that there are commonalities, that it is a way of moving between thresholds, of crossing boundaries, of moving characters across time and space very quickly, or gaining access to somewhere that you couldn't ordinarily gain access to. And so from this perspective, Discovery starts to look more like a portal in terms of its function, even if in terms of how it looks and how it acts within the narrative, that doesn't look like it. It's a vehicle. It's just moving people, and it just happens to be very quickly. But we could say that about the Stargate wormhole, that it's not a portal either. It's a vehicle, a transport system, like a tube system, and you just go in one end and come out the other as if you're boarding a train. But in this case, the train is a wormhole that's being controlled. So you can see it's not as clear cut as it looks like a portal, therefore it's a portal, or it does this thing, therefore it is a portal. It depends on how you look at it and what information about it, how you're describing it. What you're emphasizing about that can change whether or not you contemplate or consider it as a portal, or if you consider it as a different classification. So now I want to talk about the effect of these things. And I want to talk about it in terms of the effect on the reader, our perception of what's going on, and whether or not it actually alters our suspension of disbelief or changes our perception of the genre. So the wardrobe, obviously it's mundane and it goes to the fantastical. We think this is a children's story about imagination, where a mundane object can suddenly be something magical and an entire world created out of it. And we can see actually an element of that in J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, where they talk about the portkeys. And the portkeys are very much mundane objects, but have a magical ability to transport people. And suddenly you see that the portkey is just like the wardrobe, even though the portkey is, in terms of its function, much more like Discovery, that it's an object that you touch and then the object goes with you to transport you somewhere. So it's a vehicle, but it's actually also like the wardrobe, because the wardrobe is a mundane object, and through imagination, it transports us to a magical place. When we think of that in terms of reader expectation, the expectation of the mundane suddenly having this fantastic element adds to our sense of wonder, adds to our sense of imagination. Whereas when we see it in Doctor Strange and the sling ring portals, that's much more mechanical. Even though it is mystical and has that glow, and it doesn't look like the clear-cut edges of scientific rationalism that has to be well defined. Like, you can see that fraying at the side, that it's something that's created, it's organic, but it's not as controlled. But in terms of that, in terms of the sling ring portal, this is something that is used as a tool. It is almost mundane, and not mundane in the idea of a mundane leading to the fantastical. The sorcerers treat the sling ring portals as entirely mundane, where Doctor Strange uses it to reach through and take books and steal an apple and all of these sorts of things. There's nothing about it that is awe-inspiring or is full of wonder. It is actually just viewed as a standard tool of what's going on. So we can see a point of connection between it and, say, the port keys of Harry Potter, where, yes, it's a mundane object, and how they use it is actually mundane. And that adds to our sense of believability in this thing as a tool and part and parcel of the world. That every time they do this, they don't go, oh, I'm still always shocked by this. They use it so often, it is considered normal. They normalize it through their behavior. And that can actually add to our suspension of disbelief. It can add to our engagement in the world, and it can add to our sense of immersion, because the characters treat it as a normal thing, even though to us, the viewer, or us, the reader, it seems strange, it seems fantastical. And then we can see the same sort of thing happening in Stargate Sg-1 with the film and the initial sort of episodes of Stargate Sg-1, the TV show. It was viewed as, strange and wondrous. But then as the season progressed, and then as the multiple seasons got added on, it just became a standard thing, so much so that they stopped showing it activating. Sometimes they even stopped showing them going through it. They didn't need to do that anymore. It was old hat. Something strange and wondrous had become absolutely normalized. And again, that adds to our believability of this thing as a part and parcel of this reality. And so it goes to our expectations about what we are perceiving. It goes to our suspension of disbelief, and it goes to our immersion in the world. But because of the pseudoscientific descriptions of the Stargate, we see that very much as science fictional, as a technology. And for us in this world, we separate technology from magic. But if we think again of the MCU, where Thor talks about the Asgardian technology, and basically just says that technology and magic are one and the same thing, which, many of you are familiar with Clarke's law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which makes us think about, well, Doctor Strange, is this magic, or is this some manipulation of a quantum state? Is it some manipulation of quantum realities and in a localized effect? And we can turn Doctor Strange's sling ring portal into a science fictional construct if we start thinking about it in those terms. Whereas the text really wants us to read it as magic, as unknowable. But then when we think of all of the different effects associated with various aspects of the magic, sometimes it's these runic structures and runes and strange inscriptions that evoke a sense of the arcane. But other times we see patterns that are mathematical patterns in the sky. And these then lead to a more sort of science fictional perception of it. We have the two different elements of, is it the quantum realm, and is it a multiverse, or is it some sort of strange and arcane and magical sequence of different realities that are all overlaying one another. How we talk about it, how we approach it, is very much based solely on the language, but that shapes our perception and whether or not we are going to agree with it, whether or not we're going to react against it, or whether or not we just accept it wholeheartedly. And then this brings us to discovery again, that because it is a vehicle, because it looks like a spaceship, we don't think of it as a portal, but like Rowling's port keys, it's a mundane object that travels with them in order to make them travel huge amounts of distances. And if we try to think of it solely in terms of, well, no, this is science fictional, it's a vehicle, it has fuel, it's powered by spores and a bit of power from the engine, and that just magically makes it transport across the galaxy. That none of that actually makes any real sense. How do the spores allow the driver to do this? Why is the mycelium network connected to every single point and not like a root system where there are different endpoints? None of that makes any sense. But because it's dressed up in science fictional rationalism, the appearance of science and technology, we accept it as technological rather than magical. And because we then are expecting a science fiction text, because it acts and is described in a way that has a pseudoscientific rationale, we accept it, and it goes to matching our expectation about the text and our suspension of disbelief and what is appearing. So because they all marry together, that is why we don't really think of it as being a portal, even though, again, unlike the wardrobe is the only one of these that is not a circle. But Discovery is made up of those circles that spin when the drive is active, and then it rotates in a circular fashion in order to go through exactly the same way that the other portals do, with the exception of the one that we go, yes, that is actually a portal. The wardrobe is a portal. So now that I've talked about those, let's have a talk about different ways and different examples of things that maybe or maybe not. I'm not suggesting these are all portals, but how we think about them. I want to show that it's not just as clear-cut as it's a portal. So this is from the Wheel of Time adaptation, and this is the sort of the gateway into a realm that you can travel, which curtails distances in the real world. So you could, if it was in our world, get in at London and walk through this other reality to New York, and it might take you a week of traveling, but there's no way you could walk from London to New York in a week, even ignoring the fact that the sea's in the way. But the distance that you travel is not the same in the sort of magical realm as it is in the physical realm. So this acts very much as a gateway, as a portal. But in this instance, this is the framework for it, and a portal activates that transports you into this realm. And it becomes then much like the Stargate system, where there's a gate, a portal forms, the stable end, the event horizon of a stable wormhole that you go into. There is a travel time, and once you've finished traveling all the way along, you come out at the other end somewhere far greater distance than you ever would have been able to travel in the same time if you'd done it in a mundane fashion. So we can see that this is quite similar to a Stargate, but not really the same as the wardrobe, because this leads to a network, it leads to another realm. And in that way, it's actually conceptually quite similar to what happens with Discovery, because Discovery vanishes in the real world, travels through the mycelium network, even though it appears instantaneous. They are actually traveling along a network, much like the Stargate, to arrive at a destination, and they pop back into the real world. So what about this then? The TARDIS, time and relative dimensions in space. Doctor Who has a magic box that you can get in, and it can teleport you instantaneously to different places in space and time. That this is, like Discovery, it is a vehicle. It's not a portal, but you get in, you travel these things, and you appear somewhere else. So it's functioning like a portal. It's functioning that way. It's transporting characters across time and space incredibly quickly so that you can move from a mundane setting, so a an estate in London where you pick up your companions and then suddenly you're on an alien planet, or you're in the past, or you're on an adventure. You've gone from the mundane to the fantastic, just like using the wardrobe moved the children from mundane England into Narnia. It's functioning in the same way, but like Discovery, it's a vehicle. It can fly around, it can move, it's not static. What then about this? The Argonath from The Lord of the Rings. And the Argonath does not transport people, but it denotes a threshold. Beyond this point is a new land, a new realm. When you cross this threshold that is marked by this strange and foreboding structure, and you can see in some respects, it looks a little bit like the Wheel of Time example above it, that it is marking a passageway, a transition. And of course, here it's linked to a river. Again, something that's going to transport you faster across a space than, say, walking would. But I think most people would agree this is not a portal, but it is one of the things that portals do, is they mark a transition from one space to another space. And here we have the Nautilus. Now, this is actually not, this is from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen rather than the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But I thought it was a very cool image because one of the issues with this, like the TARDIS, the characters can get on the Nautilus, and submarines and these strange futuristic technologies can take us to worlds that we never would have been able to see. In the case of the Nautilus, and the time period is, it takes the characters under the ocean, down to the ocean floor, a new realm, a place that is alien and antithetical to human life. And they can only do that by traveling through the Nautilus. And the Nautilus then is acting as a way to explore these things, as a way to go from one place to another very quickly, because the Nautilus can travel very quickly, but also explore realms that they couldn't ordinarily get to. And again, I'm not suggesting that it is a portal, but when we think about things in terms of their function, we can see similarities about how they are being used. And the Nautilus, again, is frequently used, particularly in the film version of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, to transport the characters very quickly from one place to another that ordinarily they would not be able to do, exactly the way that a portal functions. And in terms of the film, they get onto the ship, the submarine, and then it's quick, cut, cut, cut. They are suddenly there. It functions narratively the same as a portal, but obviously as a vehicle, as a submarine, it's a technology that we are actually familiar with. We would find it very hard to consider it as a portal, even though in terms of its narrative function, it is doing the same thing as the Stargate. It is doing the same thing as the TARDIS. It is doing the same thing as the Discovery. And in fact, in a lot of respects, it's doing the same thing as the wardrobe. So the function is very similar. And now we're going to go a bit abstract. So this is obviously a book. Is a book a portal? And we can think about it literally in the never-ending story. It is a portal. Bastian goes into the book at a certain point to become part of the story that he is reading. But when we think about it conceptually or from an abstract position, the book transports our minds from the mundane reality that we are sitting in into a fantastical realm. Books are portals for the imagination. And this is where we get into what is it that a portal does. And books have that ability to move us across time and space in an instant. That books, through their function, are doing that for us in the real world, not in a diegetic reality, but in the actual reality. They transport our minds to a completely different place. And books, in that regard, are a portal that we have access to, a magical portal that we see all around us, and yet we have access to. So again, this was not about saying these things are portals and other things aren't portals. It's trying to raise questions about how we conceive of portals. Because when we think of portal fantasy, we go, if it has a portal and it's a fantasy, it's a portal fantasy. But the importance of the portal to the fantasy, the structure of the narrative, the movement of the action, is it essential to it? Is it something that is used as a tool? Is it part and parcel of it? What is it doing within the narrative? For The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the majority of the adventure is in Narnia and showing how Narnia is different to the real. The portal is essential to that. It is comparing and contrasting the two different realities and going on this adventure and returning, that the portal is an important aspect of that. For Stargate SG-1, again, similar sort of thing, that the portal is essential. But as the series transitions, the portal becomes less essential because there are ships that they use. The gates are just a tool, that there are ongoing story arcs that have lots of stuff happening on Earth and very little about using it to transition. So some episodes would seem to be very much portal fantasies, but other episodes would be very, very different. And this is because within a series, you don't necessarily label the entire series as one thing, that certain elements of the series or certain episodes within the series can actually be different genres, even if the series as a whole is considered one particular genre or subgenre. And when we consider all of these different aspects, is it a tool to further the narrative drive? Is it just being used as a portal? Because there are some episodes of Doctor Who where they get into the TARDIS, they then get out of the TARDIS. It is used simply as a portal to move the characters. And those things we could go, yes, that is very much a portal quest. But there are other episodes where they're flying around in the TARDIS and they're going to different places and looking out. And it's viewed very much as a vehicle, as something slightly different. Discovery, the same thing. Sometimes it's all about Discovery being able to jump and using that jump as part of the narrative, in which case it's not really being used as a portal. But in other episodes, it's, we have this mission, we get on the Discovery, we jump, we go on the mission. The actual jumping part is just acting as a portal in that particular episode. So it's about considering these things from different positions, not to try and go, this is what a portal is, this is what a portal must do, this then must make this a portal fantasy. Because there are different ways of considering it. And by altering our perception, looking at the information that we are privileging about it, looking at how the item or how the aspect is being used within the narrative, looking at the narrative structure and the narrative movement, looking at how characters interact with it, how characters perceive it, whether or not how the characters perceive it is different to how a reader or a viewer is meant to perceive it. All of these different things add into our consideration of whether or not it is a portal, and whether or not that then lends to it being included as part of a portal quest, or a portal fantasy, or a portal narrative. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one.